He said, you know what? I want you to cover our biggest beat on Wall Street. I want you to cover Wall Street and the financial industry, the stockbrokers, traders, talk to money managers, CFPs, accountants, everybody. And I was like, absolutely, this is great. And I said, there's just one thing. I was like, you do realize that I don't know a stock from a bond. He was like, don't worry about that. He was like, you can learn that. He was like, anybody can learn that. He said, I can't teach you how to source and how to find good sources to interview. I can't teach you how to storytell and how to write well. I can't teach you excellent communication skills and whatnot. He said, you have all that. That's the core of journalism. That's what I need. As I talk about in Bounce Back and in Zero Debt, I was an overspender. I mean, that's just the quick and dirty of it. I now know that people get into debt for a whole host of reasons. Some have suffered setbacks. They've been downsized. They've been divorced. They've been through the death of a loved one, like a breadwinner and so forth. That's one group of consumers. The other folks are those who have overspent or who have mismanaged their money. I was in that second category. I'm just going to be honest and just say it because it wasn't some other financial setback that put me into debt. And going from debt to wealth now has been a journey. I personally have experienced 9 of the 10 dreaded Ds and have lived to overcome them and to tell the tale to be in a point where I'm actually thriving post setback. So it's absolutely possible to come back from any of these. The worst one of all, by far and away, was a death that I had to deal with, the death of my sister, Deborah. And so Debbie passed away in December 2014, and nothing compares to that. So if I could get past that, the other stuff, I've been divorced, I've been downsized. My disability was what they call a disability. Well, I'm sorry, that's actually the one that I don't claim. Technically, I have experienced it. I'm a mother of 3. And when you have a baby, they say you're out on disability, short-term disability. I'm like, I don't claim that one. But out of all the 10 dreaded Ds, that's the one.
Welcome to Catching Up to FI, a podcast on mindset, money, and life for late starters of any age on their journey to financial independence. I'm Bill, and I'm a late starter.
I'm Jackie, and I'm also a late starter, and we're your host. We're here to help you on your journey to financial independence, no matter where you're starting.
We're going to talk to experts, other late starters, and explore topics related to our mission.
Join us as we catch up to FI together.
Hello, folks, and welcome back to Catching Up to FI. I'm Bill Yount with my esteemed better co-host, Jackie Cummins-Koski.
That's right. Hey, Bill.
Yeah, she's coming to us from frigid Dayton, Ohio, and I'm sitting here in warm and sunny Knoxville, Tennessee in the 40s today. I'm going for a walk after this, so everybody should move to Tennessee. And maybe Jackie, who came through here over the holidays and visited us, is a little bit enticed to do so today anyway.
Yeah, I want to get back down south for sure. But today is an exciting day because we have someone that I have followed for a very long time. And when I was just getting started with learning about personal finance, but also saying, hey, I want to try to do this and share what I learned, I followed this person from back in 2009, 2010, way back in the day. And I just consider her almost like royalty because I've learned so much from her, and the contributions she's made to the financial world have been amazing.
If you haven't guessed by now, Jackie is a fangirl. We're talking to a hero today. And Jackie, why don't you introduce her for us?
Yeah, well, like I said, she's one of my absolute favorite personal finance experts and virtual mentor. Her name is Lynnette Khalfani-Cox, and she's also known as the Money Coach. And she is an icon in the financial media and financial education space. She has graced the stages of Oprah, Dr. Phil, The Steve Harvey Show, Good Morning America, The Today Show, and now Catching Up to FI. And her advice is gold. So Bill and I chased her down. We had the honor of meeting her at FinCon and also her awesome husband, Earl. So we got to meet her in person, and that's why these conferences are so great. She and her husband just lights up a room, and they're just so welcoming. You never know what to think. Somebody that you've been following for a long time, you finally see them in person. You don't know how they're going to be, but they were very, very just cool all around. We loved it. Lynnette is an internationally recognized personal finance expert, speaker, and best-selling author. In fact, she has authored 16 money management books, including the New York Times bestseller, which is one that I remember very, very well, Zero Debt, and her latest book, Bounce Back. So we're excited about that. In 2003, she started the Money Coach LLC with her husband, Earl, which is a personal financial education company that offers consulting services and courses and workshops. But also, before starting the Money Coach, Lynette was a Wall Street Journal reporter for CNBC, where she covered business and personal financial news. Lynette spent nearly 10 years at Dow Jones, a very famous company, media company. She was working as a reporter, a bureau chief, a deputy managing editor, and personal finance editor. And as of December 2024, Lynette got her newest title, Grandma. So Lynette, welcome to Catching Up to Five.
Thank you so much. That's the most important one. Sometimes I hear the accolades and I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever about the titles and the accomplishments. Mom, grandmother, wife. These are the ones that matter to me the most. So, but yeah, thank you for that introduction and great to be with you both.
Well, we talk about money, but we forget to talk about the fact that money is not as important as relationships. And we may get into that a little bit today. But before we do, I want Lynette to give us a chance to give a shout out to two charities that are near and dear to her heart and that we'll link in the show notes, because we like to have a charity of the week. Big Sister, Little Sister is one, and Electus Global Financial is the other. Lynette, tell us a little bit about those so the folks can help them out.
Big Sister, Little Sister is a great organization founded by a woman named Anisha Hughes. They help youth, girls all across the country who want to create a better life for themselves. Yes, they teach them financial education, but a lot of it is about social skills and just helping them to deal with the day-to-day stresses and challenges that can come, whether it's social media, grades, boys, or other things. So I really love that organization. And Electus Global Education teaches FLEC to students. FLEC education stands for Financial Literacy, Entrepreneurship, and Careers. Again, fabulous organization for youth between the ages of 5 and 17/18, right off when the kids are going off to college. And so both are near and dear to my hearts in different ways, but I think they're both very worthy of support.
Awesome. We will include that in the show notes. We love hearing about who our guests support and things like that. And a big part of this financial stuff is how we give back. So, yeah. So, Lynette, so you've obviously had a very long and illustrious career. I'd like to start with how you got into the financial media space as a journalist and a reporter in the early days. Take us back there.
I really got into financial journalism by happenstance. You might even say by accident. I certainly was on the track to become a journalist and did do that. I got a master's degree in journalism from USC. And then I moved from Los Angeles, which is where I was raised, to Philadelphia with my then husband, now my ex-husband, for very good reasons.
I feel you. I got an ex too.
I got it right the second time around, believe me. So,
oh, you definitely did. We had the honor of meeting him, so I can definitely double down on that.
But no, not to shade my ex-husband. Everybody moved on. Everybody's happy. Everybody's good. But no, my ex was pursuing a PhD from Penn. So that's the reason why we moved from LA to Philly. And in that time, I started working for two media organizations. I worked for the Philadelphia Inquirer by day, and I worked at night for the Fox affiliate in Philadelphia. And so I was extremely busy, obviously, literally working from like 9 o'clock in the morning till about 11 p.m. at night when the 10 o'clock news ended. And so long story short, one day my friends and colleagues at the Inky, which is what we call the Inquirer, the Inky, they were like, oh, we're going up to a job conference at Newsday. Why don't you come along with us? I was like, Newsday? Why do I want to go up to, you mean in New York? And they were like, yeah. And I said, you want me to go from Philadelphia or South Jersey, which is the bureau that we worked in, all the way up to New York? I was like, no, I'm not really trying to do that. And they said, no, Lynette, out here, we know you're from the West Coast and you could spend 2 or 3 hours in traffic on the freeway in Los Angeles. They were like, out here on the East Coast, everybody's very mobile. We take Amtrak, we'll be up there. So we go up to this conference, a media conference, a Newsday job conference. And that's where I met the folks from Dow Jones and met a very nice guy named Rick Stein, who would become my editor and a mentor for many years. And he was just watching my clip and he was like, oh, I love your storytelling, and I love your business stories. These are great articles. And honestly, I'm not even going to lie, Jackie. I was sitting there thinking, what business articles? What is he talking about?
Oh gosh.
But again, in all candor, I had my first job at the Associated Press in Los Angeles at AP. I was an intern there, and then I lobbied my bureau chief, Andy Littman, to become a reporter there. And I became a reporter there. They told us interns, they picked 10 of us across the country, and they told us, don't even expect to work in LA or New York or a big market. You have to start after your internship at like Butte, Montana or someplace small. And I was like, yeah, watch me. So anyway, I did get a spot in Los Angeles, and I happened to start when the riots broke out in Los Angeles. And so I covered a lot of Rebuild LA efforts that were run by Peter Uberoth. And a lot of it was like after Rodney King was, and it was caught on camera and the whole stuff that jumped off there in LA, things got burned down, whole industries, electronic stores, et cetera. So I did write a lot of those stories, and I was writing about the economic impact of what had happened within the community, et cetera. Again, I just saw it as me talking about things from the community angle, but Rick, of course, saw the financial side of that. And of course, he was right. So he said, oh, I love this. So we talked, we negotiated. I got a job there. And he said, you know what? I want you to cover our biggest beat on Wall Street. I want you to cover Wall Street and the financial industry, stockbrokers, traders, talk to money managers, CFPs, accountants, everybody. And I was like, absolutely, this is great. And I said, there's just one thing. I was like, you do realize that I don't know a stock from a bond. He was like, don't worry about that. He was like, you can learn that. He was like, anybody can learn that. He said, I can't teach you how to source and how to find good sources to interview. I can't teach you how to storytell and how to write well. I can't teach you excellent communication skills and whatnot. He said, you have all that. That's the core of journalism. That's what I need. And so it went from there.
Wow. It's crazy, Bill. Now we got these different types of fires going on in LA. So I'm sure you've been paying attention to that. Yeah, we're doing this in January 2025. And when you mentioned the LA fires, back then it had a whole different meaning than it does today, but nonetheless quite devastating for a lot of people. But so that's where you got your start, in the big city, huh?
It really was. I ultimately moved because I got a promotion. So I moved from Philadelphia to northern New Jersey and right outside of New York City. And yeah, I started working for Dow Jones, and it was a fantastic run. I had about a decade there, and it was awesome. I got to learn a lot. I call Dow Jones and then Wall Street Journal, CNBC, I call it kind of boot camp for the financial industry and what I learned. Because when I talked to so many folks who were helping other people to manage their money, things got demystified for me. And I found out this is not rocket science. Like, we really can learn and actually do it. So it took me a minute to start applying it to my life. But after a while, I was like, okay, let me start cleaning up my mess now that I know better what to do here.
Well, speaking of your mess, you didn't tell your employer that you had $100,000 of credit card debt, and then you went from $100,000 of credit card debt to a credit score of 850. Give us a short version of your debt story.
Well, as I talk about in Bounce Back and in Zero Debt, I was an overspender. I mean, that's just the quick and dirty of it. I now know that people get into debt for a whole host of reasons. Some have suffered setbacks. They've been downsized. They've been divorced. They've been through the death of a loved one, like a breadwinner, and so forth. That's one group of consumers. The other folks are those who have overspent or who have mismanaged their money. I was in that second category. I'm just going to be honest and just say it, because it wasn't some other financial setback that put me into debt. And going from debt to wealth now has been a journey. I tell people the truth in terms of the time frame. It took me 3 years to dig out of my $100,000 in debt. It probably took me 8 to 10 years to get into that much debt. But overall, it really was about me not having basic financial skills, not like having been taught in school or in my own home life how to manage credit wisely, how to not abuse credit, how to make sure that you're saving alongside the spending that is natural and necessary to do. And I'm very proud now to have gone from, like you said, 6 figures in debt to having a 7-figure net worth. And you mentioned my 850 FICO score. I don't have an 850 right now. I think it's like 810 or something right now. But I was profiled twice on CNBC for having a perfect 850 FICO score. There's a little thing, but if you have a 760 or greater, by the way, you're good. I call that the perfect credit scoring range.
Gotcha. Well, I watched that and that was pretty fascinating. So we'll include that in the show notes. But it's like, I don't think I ever seen an 850. Have you ever seen an 850 on your credit score, Bill?
No, I've lingered in the 800s, but no, I've never peaked. It seems almost like an accident or an act of God to make it to 850.
Any given year, less than 1% of consumers get a perfect 850. And before, like I know a couple of people, believe it or not. So I mentioned my ex-husband, his grandfather, I remember Papa had a perfect 850. Because I remember one time he was talking to me about it and he said, yeah, these people keep telling me, do I want a loan? I don't need a house loan. My car is paid off and they want to give me a car loan. He said, they told me my score is good. It's like an 85 or something. And I said, 85? And I said, Papa, do you mean like 850? And he was like, oh yeah, 850. And I was like, yeah, that's really good. So that was one. Wow. Certainly Michelle Singletary from the Washington Post.
Yes.
I know Michelle has had a 850 perfect score before as well. And you hear about these stories now and again, but yeah, it's just bragging rights for a minute. And then scores are dynamic. They're changing all the time. So.
Well, it's important because you get lower rates on loans and you get jobs because they'll check your credit score. So it's a very important number to have. And you talk in your book about one of the D's being sort of a debt journey and dysfunctional credit. But I want to introduce people to your book because you open it with a quote from Nelson Mandela. And I find these quotes from all the famous people you have in the book at the beginning of each chapter quite inspiring. And Nelson said, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall, because your book is about bouncing back, resilience, and recovery. And you almost succumbed to all of your 10 Ds that we're going to talk about in a minute. And then you have quotes from Michael Jordan, Dolly Parton, Tom Hanks, and Oprah Winfrey. And you must have Googled bounce back because in the quotes, they're almost always bounce back the term. And people talk about this. And this is just a fact of life because what is it, 60% of the time in 1 year, people are having a financial trauma. I mean, this is something we all end up with. And so you had Albert Einstein even in there, and he says, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. So we have to take our downs and turn them into, and our regrets and our shame, and turn them into ups. And that's what you do in your book because you're very positive. And we learn to fall and fail as children, and we bounce back up. We're very bounceable as kids. Now, how do we maintain that childhood resilience as adults, and why is it so important?
Well, Bill, I appreciate the question. And it's striking how much transition, often in a less positive way, happens once we become adults. Because as you mentioned, kids are very resilient. They do know how to bounce back as long as they're allowed to and not like sort of overly coddled and allowed to experience what it's like to dust themselves off, so to speak, and to get right back on out there. But one of the things that I talk about in Bounce Back, of course, as you mentioned, is that all of us face setbacks and challenges. And so I use those quotes from very high profile people, in often cases, very wealthy people financially, from a financial standpoint, very well-known people who nonetheless have had their own struggles, their own setbacks. And I wanted to convey that from the most famous, important, richest, whatever person that you might know or have heard of to quote unquote, the least of us. And we're all equal in my eyes. We're all God's children. But everybody has some challenge that they have to deal with. And I wanted to talk about the commonalities about what that journey kind of typically looks like and what those challenges are so that we could categorize them, name them, and better understand how to build resilience before they happen, in the midst of the struggle, and then post crisis as well. So you mentioned the dreaded Ds. I talk about in the book the 10 most common setbacks that, yes, indeed, in a given year, 60+% of Americans will face one or more of these external shocks, as researchers call them. That's numbers according to Pew researchers in Washington, D.C. And the setbacks, what I call the dreaded Ds, because they all start with the letter D and they're all dreadful. The setbacks are downsizing, divorce, death of a loved one, again, especially maybe a main breadwinner, disability, disease, natural disasters, debt, damaged credit, And then what I call dollar deficits, because you might feel like I'm broke, I have no cash flow or savings. And then even things like discrimination, which can also pack a powerful punch, not just emotionally, but financially. It can affect your wallet as well. So, part of what it means to be able to recover as an adult and to build your resilience is about learning not only the strategies that it takes to recover quickly as opposed to making things linger for years and years and years, but also about having the right mindset to put you in kind of the right environment emotionally to be able to recover. So I think one of the biggest things that most people are shocked when they read the book is that they want to get to tell me the financial solutions or tell me the how-to steps. And really, I take a lot of time and care in the book to talk about self-care, about having connection and community with others, about practicing gratitude, about grounding yourself, about taking what might seem to some people like a little bit, but about taking some of the steps and some of the processes that you have to kind of sit with and go through that will help you to not only build resilience, but to sidestep that same misfortune in the future, or to be able to navigate out of a problem situation again more quickly than you otherwise might have.
Yeah, Lynette, in the book, I really appreciated that you did focus on that. And because I think your book Bounce Back, it is totally speaking to our late starter audience. And a lot of times the very first thing they ask is about the finances, about the nuts and bolts. But really, there's these other things about giving yourself grace and taking inventory of everything that you got going on and stuff like that. That's like so important. So I appreciate it that you dedicated a lot of the book to that. You know that fantastic feeling when life just clicks, when you feel fully in control and on track? Well, Bolden Planner makes that happen. Their software is right up there with some of the professional planning software I've used as a CFP professional.
I recently started using Bolden, previously known as New Retirement. It's the closest thing to a fortune teller or a magic wand that you'll find in real life. The tool turns your dreams into plans and your plans into reality, whether it's funding college, retiring early, or knowing that you can help your aging parents. Bolden gives you the answers you need to achieve your goals.
Well, with Bolden, you'll make the right decisions. Run any what-if scenarios and see how your choices shape your future. What if you paid off debt faster? What if you invested more this year? Bolden breaks it all down and you'll make confident, informed choices that help you catch up to 5.
With Bolden, you are in control. No more guesswork or second-guessing your decisions. Bolden gives you the financial know-how to understand your options and take charge of your future with confidence.
Ready to get started and get on track with the life that you want? Head on over to go.bolden.com and then /catching up. That's go.bolden, BOLDIN.com/catching up. With all these dreadful D's that you have, I was going to ask you, how many of these have you experienced? It might be better to ask how many you didn't experience.
Well, I personally have experienced 9 of the 10 dreaded D's and have lived to overcome them and to tell the tale to be in a point where I'm actually thriving post setback. So it's absolutely possible to come back from any of these. The worst one of all, by far and away, was a death that I had to deal with, the death of my sister, Deborah. And so Debbie passed away in December 2014, and nothing compares to that. So if I could get past that, there's other stuff. I've been divorced, I've been downsized. My disability was what they call a disability. Well, I'm sorry, that's actually the one that I don't claim. Technically, I have experienced it. I'm a mother of 3. And when you have a baby, they say you're out on disability, short-term disability. I'm like, I don't claim that one. But out of all the 10 dreaded D's, that's the one that when I say I've experienced 9, that's the 10th one that I haven't personally experienced.
And I would say our late starter audience would have the same story. I mean, it's not just one thing. There's always a plethora of things that may happen simultaneously that lead to a shock, as you say, and then awe and shame and putting your head in the sand and and we're here to try and help them bring it out of the sand and find their way back to financial wellness. A couple of the D's that we wanted to talk about in greater detail, because I think both of you have experienced this. I fortunately have not. I have a wonderful wife, love of my life, but you guys both went through divorce. Tell us how prevalent this is and what it means to be a financial shock. Because I think a lot of our audience, that we hear this conversation in our Facebook community, women more often maybe than men suffer a setback here and financial trauma that requires late starting and recovery.
Well, we know that well above 50% of all marriages in the US fail and end in divorce. And oftentimes, even for second marriages, the numbers can be higher, so-called gray divorces, people who get divorced or separate later in life. That is absolutely not going to happen for me and my husband. I can tell you that for sure. We're very happily married. And like I said, I got it right the second time around. But I think that the prevalence of divorce makes it one of these things where it might be one where there is, to a certain extent, a little bit less of shame and stigma around some of the other ones, debt and damaged credit and whatnot. People tend to suffer in silence a little bit more about that. But divorce, as women and as men, we talk about that. It's like, oh, let me tell you what happened or whatever, in my relationship. Sometimes, not always, obviously. But what I can say, the prevalence for women to lose their standard of living is very common and is typically greater for women. Post-divorce, women often find that not only their standard of living, but the children, if there were kids involved, suffers a decline. But not always. Again, when I tell my story, I talk about how I was the main breadwinner in my family. So when I divorced from my ex-husband, I was the one paying alimony and child support, for example. And it was a lot. It was over $6,500 a month at one point. Oh. I paid for years. I paid 5 or 6 years worth of alimony and support. It stepped down every single year. But long story short, I tell women all the time, don't automatically assume that if you're getting a divorce that the courts or the judge will rule that because you're the mom or the woman in the relationship, et cetera, that a check is going to come your way. No, not at all. I divorced in New Jersey and I knew that I was going to be the one paying. And it wasn't an issue for me on that front, that it wasn't something that I expected. Again, I told you that my ex-husband had been a student. So he had received his PhD at that time, right? As we're separating, he had taken a little bit longer and went from Philadelphia. I told you we moved to New Jersey for my job promotion. And so he didn't have a job yet. He became a professor and he did get a job. But at the time, I was the only one making money in the house. So I knew, of course, I was going to be the one paying the bills and that kind of thing. But it can absolutely throw your finances out of whack because now you go to two households living on one income, or two households where one has a very diminished income to support the other.
Yeah, that was one of the bounce back stories that you were kind enough to be very transparent about, because now you're in such a different place. People assume you were always there, but you weren't. You had to deal with that. And that stuff doesn't happen overnight between court hearings and custody and all these maintenance support of your ex-spouse and all of that. But before I hear from you on that, does Earl have a brother? I want to know.
You know what? If I had $1 for how many times I've been asked, do you have another Earl? Is there another Earl?
Because Earl is the man. Earl is the man. I can tell you that.
I've literally been asked that so many times. He really is so wonderful. I thank God because I've lucked out, honestly. So, but he does, the short answer is he does have a brother who lives in the DC area who is also happily married. So,
oh, darn. Okay. Yeah. I thought I'd give it a shot, but yeah, so.
This is not the first time Jackie has asked this question on the show.
Sometimes I've regretted it once I met the brother, let me tell you. Well, but yeah, I like the divorce thing, and to have you talk about, to know the Lynette that I know today, and to think about in the early days what you had to go through to get there. And it's so much better talking about it in past tense, but while you're going through it, it is really, really tough. And so you were able to overcome that, and boy, you bounced back up like a trampoline. And so I appreciate you sharing your story, and you included the stories of others that was in the book and all of that. So the divorce was there. You mentioned your sister, Debbie. So that was one of the other Ds. And you said she passed in 2014. Okay, so my condolences. That's very tough. I have 3 sisters, cannot imagine. But do you mind talking a little bit about that?
Well, my sister Debbie was beyond phenomenal. Obviously, I dedicated the book to her. And talk about a person who was so out in front. Like almost not a month goes by that I don't see something, experience something, do something, looking at an email in my inbox and say, "Ugh, it reminded me of Debbie," or that she was so out in front. I found emails where she was telling me about Instagram. Like, I was like, how did, before I was even thinking about getting on social media, anything. So, well, what I can tell you is that you probably have experienced some of what I've experienced, I'm sure, since you said you have 3 sisters. So I have 5 sisters. I still say that I have 5 sisters.
Yeah.
And my sister Debbie, she was 49 years old when she passed away. She had an 11-year-old daughter. Her death came completely out of the blue. It was extremely traumatic for my family. And in all candor, it was just devastating. I could not get out the bed for a couple months. I couldn't work. Earl had to cancel things that I had. He had to try to run the business by himself, get other people to write content for me, and just try to make some semblance of making the business continue. But it was crushing. It was just absolutely soul sucking. And I was so focused on why her? And indeed, they could not understand why she passed away at first. It was a lot going on, but the gist of it is that we had to have 2 autopsies. Things were inconclusive. And so the why part just threw us for a long time. But then even after we got some more medical evidence, the why her still happened. And so the focus was on she was too young. What about her daughter? All of those things. And it wasn't until I went through therapy, grief counseling, and other ways of coping and trying to come to terms with her death that I realized that I was focusing honestly on the things that were going to keep me in a loop of sadness and of sort of like regret about the past and why her, why her, why her. Once I was able to focus on, wow, my sister lived an amazing life, and to focus on her life instead of her death and how she died and why she died, it gave me so much more gratitude. It gave me so much more ability to bounce back because then I started appreciating like every single thing. I mean, the stories that people would tell me, the things that I was applying and doing in my own life. Honestly, I would 100% not be where I am right now in my career or in the things that I've done and accomplished if it wasn't for her. Debbie was with me when I went on Oprah. Debbie was the one who told me to go to leverage my journalism skill set and to go from print to TV. She told me like 2 years before I actually even thought about doing it. I was like, TV, I don't want to be on camera. I was like, those people they just reading a teleprompter. I saw them as kind of not the smart ones in media.
There's a lot of similarity in recovering from personal trauma and financial trauma and the process you go through of sort of regret, getting mired in the past, trying to get back to the present and looking forward to the future. And those are the kinds of struggles we see our late starters have. Those are the struggles that I know I and Jackie had. And while death has big financial implications, recovering from the emotional and personal things, you talked about some ways you did it. The biggest one to me is you ask for help. When you leave yourself in shame, isolation, regret, and leave yourself in the past, and you get isolated, that's dangerous for your health, be it financial or otherwise, right?
Financial, physical, and emotional. It's absolutely dangerous. And so that's why I talk about in the book about the importance of connection and of community. And it doesn't really matter which one of the dreaded D's that you go through. When you have community and connection with others, it makes your recovery and your ability to bounce back so much stronger, greater, faster. If you've lost a job and you feel like, oh my God, I'm ashamed, I don't want to talk to anybody or whatever, well, that next job is going to come because of somebody you know, or somebody in your circle or your sphere of influence, a former colleague, a friend, a family member, etc. So yes, it's not until you kind of reach out and are ready to do so, because sometimes you have to also sit with things. And so one of the points that I make in the book is that before you can just automatically bounce back, sometimes there's a tendency to go like, okay, let's move on. Let's get on with it. And things like grief have no time span. They have no set agenda to say, okay, a year or two later, you should be able to deal with this and to just, no, you're going to have waves that are going to come and go if it's something like grief or the loss of a loved one. But you should also know whether it's recovering from job loss, recovering from a divorce, recovering from the death of a loved one, or some other dreaded D. Again, the people in your life, and the ability to sit down, actually experience the emotions. I'm sad, I'm disappointed, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, to really process those. That's actually important in your journey of recovery as well. And like so many times, people lose a job and they're just like, okay, I just want to go to the next job. But one of the things that I talk about in Bounce Back is you may have ancillary grief. If you have somebody who you've lost, they're called ancillary losses, right? Along with, of course, the tangible, the person is gone. And in my family, for example, one of the ancillary losses that we experienced was that Debbie was the organizer. Debbie was the socialite. She was the party planner. She was the person who made sure for the holidays that everybody was together as a family. And so one of the ancillary losses that we initially suffered was the disintegration of that to a certain extent.
Wow. I think it's so important for people to hear that. So if that's the only thing they get out of the book, that is like so important. I was talking to an older lady the other day, and she had lost her husband way back in the day when her youngest daughter, who was adopted, was a year old. And her son, who was biological, was 9 years old. And a lot of this goes back to finances, but she said they would have never had insurance if the adoption agency didn't require her. It was a Korean adoption. If they didn't require her to get insurance. And she went through grief counseling and all that. She became a grief counselor and a social worker for K through 12 schools as a result of that. And I think that was a part of her healing, but it's just so interesting to hear that story. So even her career is not just a career. It sort of came out of the love she had for her husband, and that was her way of healing from it. So I guess people kind of find their ways to bounce back, but you need to do it in your own time. And sometimes I don't think that's the message that we get. And it was loud and clear in the book.
Sure. And not only about timing, the other thing I want to do, because I definitely want to give your audience a message of hope and inspiration. Every setback that you encounter, every dreaded D is also a transition, and it's also an opportunity for something new in the future. Now, let me be very clear, because some people might be like, well, are you saying I'm going to be happy about this in the future? I'm going to you saying, are you happy your sister passed? Absolutely not. No. However, at this stage, I am not only mindful, I'm keenly aware of the fact that even amid trials and tribulations and all kind of adverse circumstances, there is an opportunity for growth. There is an opportunity for modeling certain behavior. There's an opportunity for discovery. It might be, somebody might say, the most crushing thing I've ever dealt with is I lost a spouse. I lost a child. And it's not even fathomable, like how I can even go on. In the midst of those kinds of very deep and serious emotional blows, you may get an inspiration. You may get a testimony that you're able to share with somebody else to help that person to make it through. So even though it might be, and it truly is, something potentially traumatic to have to deal with, and we've all had financial traumas, shocks, and things of that nature, but it's something that's emotionally traumatizing as well. I ask people to try to hold on to the idea, even the little kernel of possibility, that something good will actually come out of this. What the good is to be determined, but there absolutely is potential and upside. And in addition to myself and talking about my own experiences, in each chapter, I interview people who have gone through each of the dreaded Ds. We talked about disability earlier. I interviewed a guy, Chris, who is a quadriplegic. Now, born without ability to use any of his arms or legs, in a wheelchair for the first 18 years of his life. Somebody could say, well, what is the upside there? But Chris was not one of those people who will stay mired in why me, the past, regret, being depressed. No, he taught himself to walk. He taught himself to run. He's at a university right now, at a college. He's a brilliant mathematician, and he lives independently. He bought a house and lives on his own. It's extremely rare for a quadriplegic to do what he's done. But I wanted to share stories like that of people who seemingly totally insurmountable odds. My things that I've been through, they're their own level of setback, but some people have far, far, far greater struggles.
Yeah, that's important to share those inspirational stories. And that's what we're trying to do with our community. We're trying to give people a place to be vulnerable, share their story. And I think in being transparent with your story, writing it down, publishing it, coming out into public with your story helps you with recovery and many others with their own wake up and recovery. And that's really what you're doing with this book. I want to transition right now to a D that is not talked about so much. It's your 10th D. And we want to dispel pretty much the bias that I think we have in the word discrimination. That's a dreaded D, but it's about how it hurts us all. That's how you talk about it. Can you take us through a little bit of your discussion about how D for discrimination is sort of a financial trauma that all of us experience?
Well, there are so many forms of discrimination, and unfortunately, the effects of discrimination are wide ranging. And so, if you talk about gender based discrimination, if you talk about sex based discrimination in terms of sexual orientation, if you talk about race based discrimination, age discrimination, and more, you can clearly see if you add all those populations together, there's a lot of people who are going to be affected. But what I also talk about in Bounce Back is that even the folks who are doing the discrimination ultimately are harmed by it in the long run. For example, let's say the financial institution that will not lend, for example, to women or to Black or brown people who are aspiring entrepreneurs. Well, now that community is missing out on what could be very viable products and services from a female entrepreneur, a Black owned business, a Latino owned business, an Asian owned business, and so forth. Furthermore, places like McKinsey have done studies and they showed that if we just tackled the discrimination problem in terms of the wealth gap in America, we could boost GDP overall in America significantly. And so, because we would have more participation from more communities in the financial services arena and in the financial ecosystem, more people buying stocks and bonds, more people purchasing houses, more people contributing to the economy of this country. So ultimately, if it's not affected you personally in some way or somebody you know or care about, the economy is harmed, communities are harmed, or the worst case scenario, and I didn't really go into this in Bounce Back, but certainly it just kind of sprung to mind. When you discriminate against and disenfranchise people, we were talking about the riots in Los Angeles and that kind of being my foray into journalism initially. I believe it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, a riot is the language of the oppressed, and that people will lash out and do things that to us might just seem contrary to their own best interest. Like, why would you burn down a store in your own neighborhood? It's trying to have a voice. It's trying to protest. It's trying to speak up. And so if you disinvest in communities, if you systematically poison water, if you tax people in ways that are discriminatory, then people will start to lash out in ways. And then that too can harm other people.
Yeah, and you talk a little bit about like what can we do? Because like Bill said, I don't hear the discrimination piece as talked about as much as far as trying to overcome or bouncing back from. So what are some of your tips on what to do if you've been a part of or on the losing side of discrimination?
Well, I'm very clear in Bounce Back in articulating the financial impact as well as the emotional impact of being discriminated against. I share my own story of housing discrimination, for example, where we had an appraiser come through. We lived in a very wealthy white neighborhood in New Jersey. Bottom line, the appraiser came through, saw us, and I could tell it was not going to be a good outcome. And sure enough, appraised our house $100,000 less than it should have been. We appealed and they did send another appraiser back out and then we got the right number. But ultimately, discrimination has a cost. If you're discriminated against because you have an ethnic sounding name and you don't even get a call back and you can't get a job, or you're discriminated against because you are a member of a same-sex couple and the person doesn't want to hire a gay person or an LGBTQ individual, that's disenfranchising you and harming your economic prospects. If you're a woman and you have had a baby or you are a certain age and somebody is going to not pay you as much or pay others more because of your gender or your status as a parent or not, then again, that can harm you financially. So some of the ways that I talk about bouncing back from that is, one, to name it and to be very specific in calling it out. So sometimes we don't want to call it out. We're just like, oh, we want to make nice. We want to kind of go along to get along. We want to not make waves. But it's only by pointing out misbehavior that we can start to address it. So that's one thing. Another thing is to go to, again, community. Find the connections where you're getting support, because sometimes you can kind of feel gaslit. You can say, did that really just happen? Like, no, I'm making too much out of this. Like, no. They didn't mean what they said, even though they were very clear with what they said, right? And intent really doesn't matter. It's the impact on you that matters, right? So sometimes you might need to take a beat and to go to safe spaces and to people, organizations, and it could be within an organization. It might mean going to HR. It might mean going to a network or a supportive group of individuals or a trusted person for feedback and for kind of a little somebody to bounce some stuff off of before you kind of tackle it. Because sometimes in the moment, it's hard to address things, right? Another way that I talk about it is writing things down and documenting. And this is another strategy all throughout, about journaling, about processing things, about also reflecting on what has happened. Because again, if you're not careful, I don't want to shame or blame anybody. We're not responsible for what somebody else does to us. But what I'm saying is that if you're not careful, you can find yourself repeatedly in situations, right, where the same patterns of behavior emerge. And so you do have to ask yourself, what role, if any, am I playing in this? Am I in a situation because, or not because, am I in a situation either in part or in whole because of me not addressing or kind of nipping in the bud something that should have been addressed? So like I said, when the person came out to my house and gave me that $100,000 less valuation, I was like, nope, absolutely not. This is what we're not going to do. Here, let's go to the receipts. Here's this house, and this house. My house is just as good. And here's all the fact finding in the data. Right. And, you kind of address some of that stuff. But I think discrimination is one of those thorny ones to deal with.
Yeah, and I definitely feel you on that. I've heard a lot of stories about the whole appraisal thing. And so I'm getting ready to sell my house. And I hate that I have to even think about that. You know what I mean? But like you said, call it what it is. And I also appreciate the book, like you dropped a lot of great resources at the end of each chapter. So you're talking a lot about the emotional stuff and the wholeness and all of that, but you have a lot of great concrete resources, which to me makes it a great book to not just read once, but to keep around as reference. So thoroughly research. You're a journalist, so you got those skills, but thoroughly research. And when I was going through it, I'm like, man, this has everything. It has everything. So kudos for that. And for that D that doesn't get talked about a lot that you just discussed is discrimination.
Well, I appreciate the discussion because as a white male, I'm trying to understand. I mean, I was shocked when I read your book and I found out that the second appraiser suggested you take your pictures of Black family off the walls to keep the house from being associated with that. I mean, that's a reality that I don't quite get. Nobody tells me to take the picture of my white family off the walls. I mean, that's hardcore. And I want to make sure we get this message out there that we've got to get into other people's shoes. We
Right.
don't know what shoes they're walking in. We don't know what troubles they're having behind the scenes. It is not a Facebook reality. It is not a social media reality. There's a hardcore reality to this. And I wanted to just make sure we opened this discussion. I want this to continue to be discussed. And that's why I wanted this topic, this dreaded D, on this show. And thank you, too, for addressing it. I mean, in a small way.
Yeah. And let me say one other thing about that. And I appreciate you so much saying that. One of the other steps that I talk about in dealing with discrimination is kind of like enlisting other partners. When we talk about community and connection, it's that if you're discriminated against, let's say it's in the workplace, in a store or whatever, part of you enlisting and bringing in is somebody else. And it might be somebody who doesn't look like you. It might be you're going to your white coworker or your white colleague or your white boss, etc. If you happen to be African American, Asian, Latino, for example, and there's been something that's happened towards you, because getting that person's support also will help you to, again, nip the issue in the bud and not have to repeatedly deal with these kinds of issues.
Well, this has personal economic impact, as you mentioned in the book as well, because there's the gender pay gap, which is 80%. Women live longer. They have to pay for their own retirement, say after divorce. My mother had to regroup in her 50s and go back to work till she was 70 to recover from her divorce financially. And then there's the racial pay gaps with regards to Black, Latino, Asians, where they're even more dramatic. And how do they get to retirement when their pay is 46 cents on the dollar, 82 cents on the dollar? These are real issues that we need to address. I wasn't as fully aware of till I read your book.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that so much. And sometimes it's not just an educational effort to be able to impart knowledge and wisdom and statistics or whatever. Sometimes it is about touching the heart, right? About helping people to understand and to either have compassion or to heighten their awareness of what's going on. Because sometimes people might go, wow, I didn't even know this was a thing. Like, this really exists. Quick aside, related, but quick aside, I was on social media, I was scrolling. I saw that 2 police officers had put an 11-year-old Black girl in handcuffs. And she was walking down the street with 2 friends of hers. They call themselves cousins, but she was, whatever town they were in, it was snowing and there was a lot of snow on the ground. You can see in the videos. The cops came up to them and had the 11-year-old girl in handcuffs. And they said the reason that they put her in handcuffs is she fit the description of a woman who had been accused of stealing a car. The woman also had on a pink jacket, like this little 11-year-old girl did, and had on some camouflage type pants. This video is like 10 or 15 minutes long. And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, this is an 11-year-old. This is an 11-year-old child. There's nothing more. I mean, what more do we need to say? Did the kids try to run away? Did the kids do? And of course, the officers, 3 cop cars came and they sent them a picture of the woman who allegedly tried to steal somebody else's car. It was definitely not her. It was not the kid. Different shoes, different everything. And it was a woman. It was not an 11-year-old girl. The girl was just crying. The little girl, she was 5th or 6th grade. And I thought, what kind of world do we live in that the 11-year-old child is seen as a threat?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this in reverse kind of too. My son was driving my wife's car one time, and I did not realize that the registration was out of date. And 3 police pulled him over because they thought, I think, that he'd stolen the car. And there's a white 18, 19-year-old in there that goes through this. And I don't know if they call my wife or what, but you can imagine, and this was a luxury car. You can imagine the difference that would have happened if it had been
African American.
Person of color, let's say.
Yeah. Unfortunately, there are pockets of those biases. There's plenty of great law enforcement, great cops and all of that. In my prior job, we supported law enforcement officers, and most of them are good. But then you have these pockets that exist. And when you are on the receiving side of that, it feels horrible. And just having a little bit of, I guess, empathy in saying, wow, that Bill, the example that you gave, it could have turned out very different if the wrong person was there. And we hope that it's less and less of that. But like you said, Lynette, trying to call it out, trying to do something to say, this is not right. What can I do to try to make sure this doesn't happen? And again, it's not just the race. It's not just the gender. It's not just the sexual orientation. all kinds of other reasons, age. Bill, you could be stereotyped. I could have some of my family. No, not just for that.
Honestly, if I exited my job now as a 60-year-old, what kind of likelihood do I have of getting another one in my field? So
age discrimination is absolutely very real. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't want to beat this issue to death, but I just want to spark people to think about it. I think we've done a good job there. And I wanted to sort of move towards the closing of the show by maybe asking you, Lynette, one more inspirational story, a person you interviewed that just, let's close on an inspirational note.
Okay, I'll highlight Dawn Kelly, who worked for a financial services firm, had a very high level job, was earning several $100,000 a year. One day got a pink slip and she was absolutely devastated. She never possibly saw what the silver lining could have been. She was emotionally a wreck, to put it in her own words. Again, she was like I was with my sister Debbie and couldn't get out the bed. She talked about same type of scenario. And it wasn't until her adult daughter kind of came in the room one day and said, when you find my mother, can you let me know? Because all of this is not the mother that I know. My mother's a fighter. My mother doesn't just succumb to, you lost a job, I understand, but she was kind of like, I want to shake you up out of this. So Dawn said that was kind of a wake-up call for her. Long story short, Dawn started a business. She became an entrepreneur. She has a company called the Juice Bar, and she has multiple locations now. She's expanded so much and she's thriving and doing extremely well, making great money for herself. She's able to employ others in the community. She works with her family members and she's able to do something that was a passion of hers, which is to promote healthy eating and healthy drinks. So again, and she's on the mayor's advisory committee for small business in New York. She went through the Goldman Sachs program for small business owners. And so, yeah, you go through the tough times and you don't know what that kind of turnaround story and that testimony is going to be. But again, I encourage people to have a little bit of hope and faith that things actually will work out when you go through some steps also to kind of put yourself back on the right track. And it's not easy. I'm not saying that it's easy.
Yeah, and that is an amazing, inspirational story. And Bill, I think you probably have a good one. We both have a good one because we're late starters and we had to bounce back from that. I got a divorce. That's when I started waking up about my finances. And I can tell you hands down, I wouldn't be doing half the stuff that I'm doing now. I wouldn't be podcasting with a bald white guy.
Well, I think in the financial literacy space, we are probably the only vanilla and chocolate duo.
I love that. Vanilla and chocolate. But Bill is like, when I was, not to get back to the discrimination thing, but I think a lot of people make assumptions about you and anyone else. And I have to tell them, they're like, oh, why is he your co-host or whatever? And I'm like, you know what? He is one of my dearest friends. And I think once you strip out the exterior and you actually talk and get to know someone, and I feel like that discrimination happens from afar. When you get to know the person, completely different. And Lynette, you've seen so many things. You've been around for a very long time in this space where you've seen a lot of changes. So your voice and what you put in this book, they really matter. And they're from a very rich and deep history of being in the personal finance space and serving different roles, like being a part of journalists and in the financial media and all of that. So we thank you for doing this book, Bounce Back. And not only that, but you also have the workbook. So we both got, they just happen to be right here on my desk.
Can I correct one thing that I said? Because
yes,
Lord have mercy, I will not forgive myself and she will not forgive me probably either.
Okay.
So Dawn's business is a juice bar. It's called the Nourish Spot.
The Nourish Spot.
Oh, yeah. We got to give her a plug.
Thank you. I was like, I wanted to double check myself. I was like, why? I just said what came to mind, that is a juice bar. But then I was like, the name is not the juice bar. So I was like, let me please. It's called the Nourish Spot. Yes.
Well, we need one in the neighborhood here because I need a little more help.
We're going to do it one better. We will go ahead and drop that in the show notes. What's the locations? Where are most of the locations at?
So she is in Brooklyn.
We have a lot of people in New York that listen to the show. So we're going to drop that in there.
She's in Queens. Go look at her, find her. I know she's expanded. And she's at City Field. She's talking about opening, I don't know how far along they are for this, but I know she's at City Field also. but at the airports out there. So yeah, she's doing great things.
She's doing
Yeah,
great.
and you've got a lot of people that love to support small businesses and things like that. So we will drop it in there. And I can tell you what, the next time I'm in New York, Brooklyn, or somewhere in that area, I'll definitely be looking it up and I'll check her out. Okay.
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 Yeah.
I want to make sure we close the show with an offer. And you're very generous in your book to do this, and we want to echo this offer. You invite people to share their own bounce back story with you, and we want to invite them to share it with us, and they do so in our community. But if you email you at info@askthemoneycoach.com or email us at info@catchinguptofy.com with bounce back reader in the subject line, so we know who's coming and we can put it to the top of the queue. We may even put it on the show and you'll probably answer their email. Who knows if it gets used in further inspirational writings. So when I came out of the closet and wrote my blog for the Humble Dollar in January of 2023, it was cathartic. And it has helped. It was called Saving Our Retirement. I remember it dearly as Jonathan Clement's blog, who has a wonderful story and has been on the show with us as well. So we're eternally grateful for you and what you provide to the community. And we encourage our listenership to read Bounce Back because they will find pieces of themselves in there and you give them tangible, actionable things to do to recover. I mean, it's wonderful, right, Jackie?
Yeah. And Lynette, what's the best place to find you and to connect with you? Because you have a ton of amazing content, very high quality, journalistic level that's been around there. Where is the best place for people to connect with you?
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Certainly, I'm on all social platforms: Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter/X. I also have my own personal site, LynetteKhalfani-Cox.com. And I have my blog, which is askthemoneycoach.com. One final thing I'll share with your audience, because I didn't really mention it, but this is the workbook, the Bounce Back workbook.
I got mine.
Is the companion guide to Bounce Back. I really wanted to emphasize to people that there's a process involved in all of this in terms of recovery, but I wanted them to be able to personalize the strategies and insights and the tips that I share in Bounce Back and to apply it to their own lives. So I take them through journaling exercises, Q&A, kind of what if scenarios, reflections, quizzes, things that they can do and apply it to their lives, no matter which one of the dreaded Ds or which setback that they faced.
It's a robust resource. I'm happy to have met you in person at FinCon.
I really enjoyed talking with you. Really did. Yeah.
Well, you were dealing with your own challenges as we talked, and it's nice to get it out there. And it's the warmth of exchanging that kind of information, even with new friends or strangers sometimes, that it means you're more comfortable in your own skin. And we hope that our audience today, after talking with you, is more comfortable in their own skin, whatever color it is. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We will see you guys next week with new and exciting guests on Catching Up to Fi.
Thanks, Lynette. So, Bill, as you know, we cannot do this show without our amazing staff and the people that help us put this on. Our social media maven is Diana Falk, and our editor is Fritz Brizard. We love them, and they keep us going.
Yeah, Jackie, I mean, this show wouldn't have the quality it has without our folks, our peeps. And we'd also like to give you a few calls to action for the show. We love our community, and we hope you love us back. If you would like to support the show and our mission to help late starters, you can do that at Buy Me a Coffee, which is a platform that allows you to make a donation. The link is in the show notes and on the website.
Check out the show notes for resources mentioned in today's show. Also, head on over to our website at catchinguptofy.com and check out our vetted resources, partners, and affiliates for discounts and their services, because we love sharing great deals.
Please share the show with others and head on over to our Facebook community to help us grow. If you prefer video, head on over to YouTube and watch the show there. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Catching Up to Fi. We would appreciate it if you could also leave us a 5-star review to help our message reach others.
And while we are financial educators that love to teach, remember that our content is for general education and information purposes only. We are not providing financial, legal, or tax advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional before making important decisions.
So, Jackie, we'll see our audience next time on Catching Up to 5. Cheers.